Well, a while ago, I did a full-on doom and gloom video laying out some of the many red flags I saw out of the upcoming Fantastic Four First Steps. And though a lot of people were yelling, "Preach on, brother," a lot of other people either asked if I thought there was any hope for this poor movie at all, or outright called me a grifter rage baiter for, voicing my concerns. Well, fear not, my flock, for there actually are some green flags as well, that this might not only be, at minimum, a pretty good movie, but maybe even, and much more importantly, a good Fantastic Four movie. There are things about this movie that I'm actually fairly optimistic about that make me excited to see what we're going to get out of the Fantastic Four finally entering the MCU. Or at least entering an alternate universe tangentially related to the MCU, I should say. So let's try to even out some of that negativity with some honest-to-God, no bullshit green flags that Fantastic Four First Steps will actually turn out to be good. So let's start with one of the biggest ones, that being Dr. Doom ain't the villain. We already know they're planning to use some likely bastardized version of Dr. Doom as the main villain in the next Avengers movie, with them explicitly claiming he's not even going to be in First Steps, though I suspect that's total BS and will at least feel him as a presence throughout the movie or outright have him in a post-credit scene to hype people up for whatever they're planning, because to not do so, I think, would be kind of stupid. However, all signs do point to Dr. Doom not being a major part of the movie's plot, which, for the Fantastic Four on film, will be a first. Now, there are likely a couple of you already asking, "Yo, why the hell's that a good thing, homie? Doom is the greatest villain of all time. Why's this shit a green flag?" Well, you are absolutely right. Dr. Doom is friggin' awesome. He's so awesome that whatever story he's in, he usually completely takes it over. Doom's ego forces him to make himself the center of every situation he's in. His ambition drives him to take every bit of power he can get access to in those situations. And his sheer competence gives him the ability to make whatever plans he comes up with a reality. And because he's such an incredible and iconic villain, there seems to be this idea that if you're doing the Fantastic Four, you gotta have Doom in as well. But the Fantastic Four, man, they've got a lot of awesome and interesting villains to choose from who, even if they do use them in a movie, if Doom's there, they ain't gonna get fleshed out at all. In the 2000s version, they tied Doom to the team's origin, meaning that as we tried to develop these new characters, we also have to keep jumping back to follow Doom's journey from assholey CEO to outright supervillain. And while Ben and Johnny got an arc across the movie, I feel Reed and Sue suffered from the lack of time to develop their individual characters fully, even if we got to develop most of their relationship. In the sequel, they bring in the Silver Surfer as the Herald of Galactus, and he is friggin' awesome. But because they also brought back Doom, they need to focus a good amount of screen time in that movie on his plans to steal the Surfer's power, basically removing most of the potential time we could have closely followed Norrad's journey from emotionless harbinger of the end to rebellious hero of all life. And which sucks because that's the whole point of the character. And instead of the focus of the final act being centered on building up and showcasing Galactus, as it should have been, he was reduced to just being a big CGI cloud, so Doom could be the main focus of that final battle instead. And then over in Fan Four Stick, they tied Doom to the team's origins again, but that's the least of that movie's problems. With Doom finally not being in this movie, we have a chance to let the Fantastic Four have some actual breathing room to develop past just their basic personality traits and powers. We can really get to know their interpersonal dynamics in a more intimate way, similar to how we got to know some of the most popular MCU heroes like Captain America and Iron Man in their own first movies. And not having Doom in should actually be good for building up Doom as well. If Doom just walks in at the beginning of the movie and someone says, "Hey, that guy's dangerous," that really doesn't mean anything. He's just another random villain in a series of random villains. But if you build Reed up across this movie as a competent, super genius, badass, heroic main character leader, and then when Doom shows up, Reed tells us just how dangerous and powerful he is, then we know this dude means business. And if they're planning to have Doom as the lead villain of that next Avengers movie, then letting him build up in the background is someone even Reed frickin' Richards is concerned about after an entire movie of watching Reed kick ass, then that can go a long way towards selling this guy as a major threat to the entire MCU. But even if it turns out that the movie isn't well written or clever enough to do even that basic level of work, at the very least, not having Doom around clutching up screen time should give this movie time to actually build up and showcase the main threat that the Fantastic Four are supposed to be facing. Bringing us to our next green flag, friggin' Galactus is in this movie. Rise of the Silver Surfer completely pussed out on giving us Galactus in all of his glory, and I and many comic fans are still frickin' salty about it. They built him up across the whole movie as this big deal, and when the time finally came, we get a cloud thing. Now, normally, I'd be super into space tentacles digging into the Earth's core to absorb all life in a movie, but this was not advertised as that. This was advertised as being frickin' Galactus. Is it crazy for me to have expected to see Galactus after they kept saying Galactus is coming. My guess is they looked at his design in comics and decided that a giant guy in a purple suit was just too silly for a movie where Reed uses his stretchy powers to dance, and the Fantastic Car is powered by a goddamn product placement Hemi. I don't care what Kick-Ass says. If they'd portrayed Galactus seriously, people would have accepted it just fine. Because thinking he's not grounded and serious enough to have put in that movie just shows the creators of the movie did not understand the idea behind Galactus at all. He's not just some random-ass space threat the Fantastic Four face off against, where it doesn't really matter what he looks like. The reason he was portrayed in those original comics the way he was is because the coming of Galactus is supposed to be the Marvel version of literal God coming down and ushering in the apocalypse. He's not another villain. He's not some space invader or monster. He's beyond all of that in morality, scope, and raw power. The story of Galactus is the story of the Fantastic Four versus God, an epic Kirby myth of the modern era. If you portray Galactus well, he is frickin' terrifying. He doesn't care what you think he looks like or how your mind attempts to understand what he is, because his journey has ended and your planet shall sustain him until it has been drained of all life. He's a giant cosmic god entity with his own lore and history predating the dawn of the universe. We are as nothing compared to the might of Galactus, and the Fantastic Four are not initially able to even beat him, without also threatening the destruction of all reality in the process through threatening to use the ultimate nullifier. There's Lovecraftian cosmic horror, which is what that first movie was trying to do with him, where the horrors are eldritch abominations that are beyond all human perception or understanding. Galactus should not be that. He is outright biblical horror. Humans are the dominant species on this planet, but, we all know our place in the hierarchy when it comes to God. If an ungraspable, formless entity decides it's going to come down and consume the planet, we'd likely all go insane from the unfathomable horror. But if a very classical human concept of God decides he's going to come down and consume the planet, we are all going to have to endure that horror with our sanity sadly fully intact, even though we can barely grasp what's happening. Now, we don't know how he's going to be portrayed in this movie yet. Likely they're not going to take any of that into consideration and will likely totally screw him up. But from what little we have seen of him, he looks like Galactus. Which should just go without saying, right? But as a huge plus compared to last time and most of the modern MCU villains. And though they've let out little leaks here and there, like, popcorn buckets and crap, they're still being coy with outright showing him off in trailers. Meaning they also understand how important and impactful his first full appearance to audiences on that first day in theaters should be. The coming of Galactus is one of the most well-remembered and impactful stories in all of Marvel Comics history. And if they do him even mostly right, they've got an element that they can keep using for years of future MCU projects. And building him up like this gives me hope that they understand that about him at least. And it also gives me hope that this ain't gonna be another frickin' kill him in 2 seconds after he pops up situation, like that BS with Shumagorath in Multiverse of Madness. Or, I'm sorry, Gargantos. And I'm gonna be honest here. This is the only green flag I need. The potential to actually see Galactus adapted is why I'm going to be in the theater day one. And if he looks like a Galactus, talks like a Galactus, and acts like a Galactus, I will give this movie a 10 out of 10, even with the random-ass Silver Surfer gender swap and Reed having a goddamn mustache. And with Galactus looking more or less like he's supposed to, that leads us into our third red flag. The costumes ain't just generic MCU costumes. When the MCU first started, Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, and Captain America all had elements of their designs and characters that were different from the comics. But they also all looked immediately recognizable as the characters they were based on. Same goes with, most of their villains. But somewhere along the line, the MCU seemed to completely forget any of this crap was even supposed to be based on comic books and just started making up their own designs and personalities for characters. Oh, Shang-Chi no longer has the badass Bruce Lee-inspired Master of Kung Fu design of comics. Instead, he looks like a generic MCU superhero. Instead of taking inspiration from the bold, iconic designs of Jack Kirby, the Eternals look like generic MCU superheroes with circular patterns on them. And instead of taking inspiration from either her classic original Captain Marvel costume or her pretty successful Next Wave redesign, they had the brilliant idea to put Monica Rambeau into a generic MCU-style costume. And it's even worse for the villains. Gore ain't no alien horror design anymore, he's just Christian Bale in whiteface. Taskmaster doesn't have his iconic skull mask, he's just a paintballer. And instead of getting the Mandarin that we were promised ever since the Iron Man 3 debacle, we just get the awesome design of some guy with bracelets so that he can give those bracelets to Shang-Chi, making the supposed master of Kung Fu even less like the character he's supposedly based on. And when we got our first version of Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness, I'm gonna be honest, I thought he looked pretty cool. But there was still something off about him. The Fantastic Four have had many costume designs over the years, but for the most part, they pretty much always wear bold, simple uniforms. Usually just a solid blue with some white or black breaking it up at the collar, belt, gloves, and boots. But with the first MCU read, what did we get? Pretty much just what an AI would have spewed out as an MCU-fied Fantastic Four costume. Nothing really unique or distinct about it besides being blue and having a 4. Just the same glossy, textured, tactical-style uniform with lots of black trim tossed all over at random spots to make it look more slimming and badass. This read does not look like he stepped out of his own corner of the world with his own unique identity, world building, and new aspects of superheroics to offer. He just looks like he stepped out of the same frickin' costume shop as Ant-Man, Daredevil, She-Hulk, and Hawkeye. With this new version of the Fantastic Four, they're starting to think again like they did when they were setting up the MCU in the first place. They've tossed all the stereotypical ways they adapt these costumes usually into the garbage and looked at the comics first for inspiration. We're actually getting the kinds of flat, bold colors that we usually do not see outside of comics in this movie. Something the MCU hasn't really even tried to do since Captain America in the first Avengers movie. Now, these costumes ain't perfect or nothing. Different people have their own opinions on elements of them that are unique to this movie, and I friggin' hate Reed not having a white collar as well for God knows what reason. But they're immediately recognizable as the Fantastic Four, and nothing about them has that generic MCU hero look we've all been getting so used to. And it ain't just the costumes, it's a lot of the design choices. I love the practical Thing costume from the 2000s movie. It's pretty goddamn impressive how much that thing can move and emote. But he pretty much just looks like a guy with rocky skin. It's missing the inhuman appearance the Thing is known for. But in this movie, we're getting a Thing who they clearly tried to make just look like how he's been portrayed in the comics for years, with that distinct heavy brow, unique memorable face shape, and the look of the rocky texture of his skin. It's pretty clear that instead of designing the MCU version of the Thing, they told the designers to just look at the friggin' comics and find a way to make that work with the tone of this movie. Though the designs won't matter to the overall script and plot, this is still very promising. Because when you don't draw from the comics, there's no real excitement to even see these characters in live action. I like the MCU version of Wasp, for instance, but because she both looks and acts nothing like the comic version, I wasn't really excited to see her in the same way that I was when it was announced that they were doing Doctor Strange or Black Panther in movies and they looked more or less like they look in the comics. It's instead just some completely original thing that you may like or dislike, but it's completely unrelated to whatever you originally liked from comics, making me wonder, why are we adapting stuff instead of just making stuff up? And when every character in every movie starts to look the same, there's no real interest in seeing them cross over in an Avengers movie because you basically already saw what that would have been like in their own movie. The fun of the early MCU was how incredibly different the characters and their worlds looked and felt from each other. When you watch Iron Man 1, you could never imagine that Loki exists off in Asgard, or that World War II was as crazy as it was in Captain America. But when you put all of these characters together, you get something so much more interesting and unique, and it really helps to build the storytelling opportunities of this shared world in such a fun and unique way that brought in a lot of money. And this is something the MCU does seem to be realizing because they're making more of an effort to draw inspiration from the comics to allow these characters to all look different from each other again, as seen as how many characters they decided to portray in classic-style costumes in Wolverine and Deadpool. It's really started to look like they've realized that after making so many bombs trying to make up their own crap, that maybe they should return to the whole adapting comics thing. But speaking of bombs, that leads me to my last green flag. Thunderbolts was pretty darn good. Whether you personally like the movie or not, you have to admit that Thunderbolts was a huge step up from the lazy, aimless, hacksaw-edited, nonsensical, soulless rush job sludge we'd been getting used to out of the MCU. Movies like The Marvels, Quantumania, and Love and Thunder are among some of the worst movies I've ever seen. And I do not say that lightly. And during that time period, it really seemed like the MCU might just be straight up dead in the exact same way the DCEU clearly already was at the time. But say what you will about Thunderbolts, it was a movie. It had a cohesive narrative, fleshed out characters with actual arcs, finished effects, actually choreographed action, themes, and world building that actually moved the MCU forwards at all. Yeah, it bombed. It doesn't look like it actually made a profit, and not that many people even bothered to go see it. Honestly, they probably should not have greenlit it, and if they did, they should have spent about half the budget on it. I mean, it's a movie about lifting yourself out of overwhelming depression, starring a bunch of side characters very few people even remember, and introducing characters no one outside of comic readers is even aware of, with a title that guarantees most of those comic fans may just be pissed off enough to just not see the movie at all anyways. That's all completely irrelevant for if the movie's good or not. And most people seem to have a fairly positive opinion about it. This is a return to the bare minimum people wanted out of the MCU. Standalone movies that tie into a greater narrative but are not just glorified trailers for the next movie. You could watch Thunderbolts without having watched a single of the previous movies or shows and completely understand the characters and the plot, even though so many of them debuted earlier than that. With its previous movies, the MCU seemed to think that it could just piss out low-effort, unfinished swill, and people would happily pay for the pleasure to keep drinking it up. Why they thought this, I have no idea. Captain Marvel making $1 billion. But it clearly hasn't been the case, with more and more fans dropping off with every release. But it seems like someone behind the scenes has finally realized that us fans don't want to pay to go to theaters to watch the 13th round of hastily edited reshoots that never even had a finished script that they just quickly taped together last second and tossed over to theaters randomly because, oh crap, it's release day tomorrow. And so they had the brilliant idea with Thunderbolts to make a finished movie. It didn't work out for them, but it does indicate that maybe, just maybe, Fantastic Four First Steps will also be an actual movie with, a story, themes, characters, and not just a bunch of random scenes tossed in the bucket with the word movie written on it. And yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine and Guardians 3 were both good, but they were led by their own unique creative teams and pretty much removed from the rest of the assembly line of the MCU. Thunderbolts was not anyone's passion project. It was just a title they randomly announced before they had any idea what it would have been, and then had a bunch of characters randomly thrown in before they even had a finished script. If they've gotten their shit together behind the scenes enough to make something like that come out the other end as finished and good, then I feel more optimistic than I did before that something as iconic and already pre-made as the Fantastic Four could come out even better, adding a whole bunch of interesting new characters and lore elements to give the MCU at least enough gas to make it through Secret Wars. And though most of the characters were nothing like the comics and Thunderbolts, I can't blame this movie for that, since they all originated from previous projects. They worked to make all of them more interesting than I found any of them in those shows and movies, with a magical tool called writing. And if they can bring that amazing tool to the Fantastic Four, meh. And when they were adapting a comic character like the Sentry, they actually did their job. He's not a one-to-one adaptation of the comics, but he is recognizably the Sentry in a way that fans of the character will appreciate, and new audiences can find very interesting. And now I and others, though I don't know how many of the rest of you that means, are actually a little interested to see how the new Avengers will be in Avengers Doomsday. And if they can do that for those characters, hell, why can't they do that for the friggin' Marvel's first family? If they went into this movie with the same let's make an actual movie philosophy as they did with Thunderbolts, that gives me a lot of hope for Fantastic Four. I ain't expecting the greatest movie of all time. I don't even need the greatest movie of all time. But I do need a fun, cool movie with characters that I will like and are recognizable to what I like about them in the comics that regular people who don't give a crap about the comics will also like, to make both sides of us excited to see them return in a future movie. Boy howdy, wouldn't that be swell? If you left me off with Brave New World as our last MCU movie before going into this, I would have no hope whatsoever about this film. But with Thunderbolts as the last one, that is a green flag. So there you go. Those may not be the most optimistic green flags of all time, but those are the ones keeping me hopeful. And there are plenty of other good signs about the movie as well, like the actors are all good charismatic actors, even if some are questionably casted, and the soundtrack sounds pretty cool so far. But those things don't actually have anything to do with if this is going to be a good Fantastic Four or Marvel movie. There are plenty of great movies out there to watch. I want to see a great Fantastic Four movie, man. That's the MCU's job, right? So here's hoping. But honestly, I'll be freaking satisfied if Galactus is done even 75% right. I'm honestly that desperate at this point. Anyways, on an unrelated note, holy crap, man, we've nearly reached 20k subs. That's freaking crazy. I'll have to think of some way to celebrate. If you ain't joined yet, help me on the road to 20 million by hitting that subscribe bell and like button. And make sure to go follow me on X/Twitter to see my life-changing hot takes on random pop culture crap. If you've got another green flag for this movie, let me know in a comment below. Not long to go now till the movie comes out. I cannot wait to see how one of my favorite villains, Red Ghost, will be adapted. What's that? He's been cut out of the movie? Oh, god damn!